I used to think death was the worst thing that could happen to a man. 3 years serving as a guardsman in the 217th Cadian Shock Regiment taught me how naive that belief truly was. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where humanity fights an endless war against horrors that defy comprehension, death isn't the ultimate punishment. It's a release. Today, I'll tell you why serving as a soldier in the Imperial Guard is a fate worse than any grave could offer. If you crave more tales from the Dark Millennium, hit that subscribe button. The Emperor knows we need all the prayers we can get. My name is Trooper Kalen Voss, formerly of Hive Tertius on Mordian Prime, now just another lasgun in the Emperor's endless war machine. Like billions of others, I was swept up in the Imperial Tithe, that sacred obligation every world owes to the Golden Throne. They came for us at dawn, as they always do, their black transports rolling through the lower Hive streets like mechanical predators. The Munitorum officials read from their data slates with voices devoid of emotion, selecting bodies for the meat grinder, with the same care a factory worker might show when sorting scrap metal. "You," the officer had said, pointing at me with a bionic finger that clicked against his data slate. "Age 18, adequate physical condition, no signs of mutation. You'll serve the Emperor." I remember feeling pride. Pride! Emperor, forgive me. I actually felt honored to be chosen. The propaganda vids had filled my head with images of glorious victories, of heroic guardsmen standing firm against the darkness. They showed us space marines fighting alongside common soldiers, Lazrounds cutting down heretics and Xenos with righteous fury. What they didn't show was the reality, that we weren't soldiers, we were ammunition. The transport to the regimental staging ground took 3 weeks through the warp. 3 weeks of cramped conditions, recycled air that tasted of fear and desperation, and the constant bone-deep wrongness that accompanies warp travel. The ship's Geller field held, barely, but we could all feel something pressing against it from the outside. Things that wanted in. Things that hungered for our souls with an appetite that transcended physical need. During those weeks, I got to know my fellow conscripts. There was Mikhail, a forge worker from the industrial districts, who could strip and reassemble a lasgun in 30 seconds. Jaina, barely 16 but already hardened by life in the Underhive, who knew 17 different ways to kill a man with improvised weapons. Thaddeus, an old hiver, who'd actually volunteered, because he'd lost everything to a gang war and figured dying for the Emperor beat dying for nothing. We were a cross-section of Imperial humanity, drawn from every walk of life and every level of society. What united us wasn't loyalty or courage, it was ignorance. None of us truly understood what we were walking into. Basic training on Coronac 7 lasted 6 months, though it felt like 6 years. Every dawn brought fresh horrors disguised as preparation. They taught us to field strip our lasguns until we could do it blindfolded. They drilled us in formations and tactics, in the proper way to dig trenches and the correct angle for a bayonet thrust. They showed us pict feeds of various Xeno species, teaching us to recognize Orc-Wa banners and Tyrannid bioforms. What they couldn't prepare us for was the scale. The sheer incomprehensible vastness of the war we were about to join. Drill Sergeant Corvin, a scarred veteran of the Damocles Crusade, would stand before our company and recite the daily casualty reports from across the galaxy. Millions dead on Armageddon, entire regiments consumed by Tyrannid hive fleets, worlds burning under chaos incursions. The numbers were so vast they became meaningless, just statistics scrolling across a data slate. "You think you're heroes," Corvin would growl, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused on each of us in turn.
You think the Emperor personally gives a damn about your individual survival. Let me disabuse you of that notion right now. You are a las round in the Imperial's infinite arsenal. When you're spent, there will be another to take your place. Your job isn't to survive, it's to die effectively. Even then, even with his words ringing in our ears, we didn't truly understand. How could we? The human mind isn't built to comprehend the true scale of the horror that awaits every Imperial Guard regiment. We told ourselves we were different, that we were the exceptions who would somehow make it through. We had to believe that, or we would have gone mad before we ever saw our first battlefield. The final week of training, they introduced us to our first real taste of what lay ahead. A Commissar arrived. Commissar Holt, a thin man with dead eyes and a bolt pistol that never left his side. He gathered our entire company in the training ground's central square and had us watch as they brought out a prisoner.
The bolt round took the coward's head clean off, spattering the front ranks with blood and brain matter. I felt Jaina flinch beside me, her hand instinctively reaching for the combat knife at her belt, a reflex from the underhive where violence meant you had a chance to fight back. Here, it just meant you were next. "Cowardice is a contagion," Commissar Holt declared, holstering his bolt pistol with practiced ease. "One man's fear can doom an entire regiment. Remember this moment when the enemy is before you, when every instinct screams at you to run. Remember that I am behind you, and my duty to the Emperor supersedes any concern for your individual lives." That night, deployed to our first war zone on the mining world of Caris Prime, I learned what Drill Sergeant Corvin meant about dying effectively. The transport Valkyries screamed through Caris's sulphurous atmosphere like falling angels, their engines straining against the planet's dense air. Through the viewport, I could see the battlefield spread below us, a nightmare landscape of cratered earth, burning hab blocks, and the distinctive purple and gold banners of the Chaos Space Marines. The Iron Warriors had taken the primary mining complex, and we were being sent to dig them out. 30 seconds to drop! The Vox system's voice crackled through the interference that shouldn't have been there. "Emperor, protect you, Guardsman!" Mikhail was praying, his lips moving silently as his fingers worked the worn prayer beads around his neck. Thaddeus sat motionless, his lasgun held across his knees, staring at nothing, with eyes that had already seen too much in his 53 years of life. I checked my weapon for the 100th time, the familiar weight of the M36 lasgun offering the illusion of security. The first sign that something was wrong when Valkyrie 3 exploded. One moment it was flying in formation beside us, 40 souls seeking glory in service to the Emperor. The next, it was an expanding ball of superheated plasma and screaming metal. Through our viewport, I saw something impossible. The wreckage was falling upward, defying gravity as chunks of aircraft and human remains spiraled toward the orange sky. "Warp interference!" someone shouted over the Vox. "The enemy has sorcerers!" Our Valkyrie shuddered as invisible forces tried to tear it apart. The pilot fought the controls, servos whining as the machine spirit struggled against energies that violated the fundamental laws of physics. We were supposed to land at designated coordinates, establish a perimeter, and advance on the mining complex in good order. Instead, we crashed. The impact drove my teeth through my tongue, filling my mouth with the copper taste of blood. Emergency lumens bathed everything in hellish red light as we dragged ourselves from the wreckage. Of our squad of 12, only 8 were still breathing. Jaina had a shard of metal protruding from her shoulder, while Mikhail's left arm hung at an unnatural angle. "Form up!" Sergeant Brennan shouted, his voice barely audible over the sound of distant explosions. "We've got movement coming in from the north." That's when I got my first real look at Chaos Space Marines. I'd seen the training picts, studied the tactical briefings, memorized the identifying marks of various traitor legions. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the reality of facing them in combat. The Iron Warriors emerged from the toxic fog like metal-clad nightmares, their ancient power armor scarred by 10,000 years of war. Each one stood nearly 8 feet tall, their weapons designed not just to kill, but to terrorize. The first volley of bolter fire turned Private Hernandez into a red mist. The mass reactive rounds didn't just kill him, they erased him, leaving nothing but a stain on the ground where a human being had been standing moments before. The sound alone was enough to drive lesser men mad, the distinctive bark roar of bolt guns that had been silencing Imperial heroes since the Horus heresy. Lasgun effectiveness against Chaos Marines, minimal. The training manuals had stated with typical bureaucratic understatement. What they meant was that our weapons were essentially useless. My first shot struck the lead traitor's center mass, the las beam dissipating harmlessly against his corrupted ceramite armor. He turned towards me with mechanical precision, his helmet's eye lenses glowing with malevolent intelligence. I learned something important in that moment. Terror isn't an emotion, it's a physical force. It has weight and substance, pressing down on you like an invisible hand. When that Iron Warrior raised his bolter towards me, every muscle in my body locked up. My training meant nothing. My duty to the Emperor became an abstract concept. All that existed was the certainty of approaching death and my complete inability to prevent it. The bolt round that should have ended my life struck Sergeant Brennan instead. He'd thrown himself sideways, pushing me out of the line of fire even as the mass reactive shell tore through his chest cavity. His sacrifice bought me 3 seconds. Enough time to dive behind the wreckage of our Valkyrie. Enough time to realize that heroism and stupidity often wore the same uniform. "Voss!" Jaina's voice cut through the chaos, her underhive accent thick with pain and adrenaline. "Moving left! Grenades!" I fumbled for a grag grenade, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it twice. The explosion that followed was pitiful against such enemies, a brief flash and a shower of shrapnel that bounced harmlessly off their ancient armor. But it gave us a moment, and in that moment I learned the first rule of fighting Chaos Space Marines. You don't win, you just try to die slowly enough to matter. The battle, if you could call our desperate scrambling a battle, lasted 17 minutes. When the reinforcements finally arrived, a full company of Cadian shock troopers supported by a Lehman Russ tank, they found 4 survivors out of our original squad. Mikhail had bled out from his injuries. Thaddeus had taken a bolt round to the head. 6 others were simply gone, their bodies too damaged to recover. As I sat in the Medicaid tent afterward, watching the corpsmen load body bags onto a transport, I thought about what we'd accomplished. 4 dead Iron Warriors, and it had cost the Imperium nearly 100 guardsmen across all the crash sites. In the grand calculus of war, that was actually considered a victory.
The worst part wasn't the dying. It was the living afterward. When you survive an engagement that kills most of your squad, the Imperium doesn't reward you with rotation home or medical leave. They give you replacement soldiers, fresh meat to fill the gaps, and send you back into the grinder. Because in the grim mathematics of eternal war, experience is the most valuable commodity a soldier can possess, right up until the moment it gets him killed. Our replacements arrived 3 days after Caris Prime. 12 new faces to replace 12 dead ones, their eyes still bright with the same ignorant hope I'd carried just months before. They looked at me, at Yana, at the handful of other survivors with something approaching reverence. We were veterans now, men and women who'd faced Chaos Marines and lived to tell about it. If only they knew that survival wasn't skill, it was luck. And luck in the 41st millennium always runs out. "Tell us about the traitor Marines," whispered Private Cassius, barely 18 and still soft around the edges. "What's it like to kill one?" I wanted to laugh. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake sense into his skull. Instead, I just stared at him with what I hoped was the appropriate amount of veteran indifference. "You don't kill them," I said finally. "They kill you. If you're very lucky, you might hurt one before you die." The next deployment came faster than expected. Intelligence had located a gene-stealer cult uprising on the agri-world of Thessia Prime, and the 217th was being sent to conduct cleansing operations. The briefing officer, a pale man whose augmetic left arm clicked constantly as he gestured, made it sound routine. Civilian population compromised by Xenos infiltration. Standard purge protocols. Expected resistance minimal. 3 lies in as many sentences. Thessia Prime had been producing grain for the sector for over 2 millennia. Its rolling fields and vast agricultural complexes fed dozens of worlds, supporting billions of Imperial citizens. When we arrived in system, those fields were burning. The agri-complexes had been transformed into organic nightmare structures, their clean industrial lines twisted into something that hurt to look at directly. "Holy Throne," Yana whispered as our transport descended toward the primary landing zone. Through the armored windows, we could see them. Thousands of figures moving through the smoke and flame. From a distance, they almost looked human. It was only when you got closer that you saw the extra limbs, the chitinous growths, the way they moved with predatory grace that no human body was meant to possess. The gene-stealer cultists had been planning this uprising for decades, maybe centuries. Every farm worker, every administrative clerk, every local PDF trooper had been slowly, systematically corrupted. By the time the Imperium realized what was happening, the entire world was lost. We weren't conducting a cleansing operation. We were walking into a trap with our eyes wide open. Our landing zone was supposed to be secure, cleared by advanced scouts and orbital bombardment. Instead, we found ourselves depositing directly into a killing field. The cultists had turned the burned-out remains of an agri-complex into a fortress, its storage silos and processing plants providing perfect cover for their hybrid weapons. The first indication of trouble came when our lead Chimera transport exploded. Not from enemy fire, from within. Something had gotten inside during loading. Something with claws and teeth and an intelligence that made it infinitely more dangerous than any mindless beast. Private Cassius died in that explosion, his body torn apart by the creature that had been hiding in the troop compartment. As I rolled away from the burning wreckage, I caught a glimpse of it. A nightmare fusion of human and Xenos features, its elongated skull gleaming with acidic saliva. A pure strain gene stealer, the apex predator that spawned this entire cult. "Form defensive positions!" Commissar Holt's voice cut through the chaos, his bolt pistol already in his hand. "Any man who breaks will be..." His words were cut off as another pure strain emerged from the burning grain, moving with inhuman speed. I watched in horrified fascination as it covered 30 meters in less than 2 seconds, its rending claws extended toward the Commissar's throat. Halt was a killer. Trained from childhood to execute cowards and maintain discipline through fear. He'd probably killed more Imperial soldiers than enemy combatants in his career. But against a gene stealer, all his training and ruthless efficiency meant nothing. The creature tore him apart with the casual ease of a man swatting a fly. That's when I learned the second rule of serving in the Imperial Guard. Sometimes even the things you fear will kill you. And when they do, you might actually feel grateful. Without the Commissar's presence, our defensive line began to buckle. Not from cowardice, from pragmatism. When facing an enemy that can tear through ceramite armor with their bare claws, running becomes a tactical decision rather than moral failure. The cultists seemed to understand this, using their pure strange shock troops to break our formation before sending in the masses of hybrid infantry. I found myself fighting alongside Trooper Valen, one of the new replacements who'd been assigned to our squad. She was from Catachan, one of those Death World natives who grew up thinking everything was trying to kill them. For once, that paranoid worldview was perfectly adapted to the situation. "Aim for the human parts," she shouted over the sound of laser gun fire, her weapon spitting coherent light with mechanical precision. Her advice saved my life more than once during the running battle that followed. We fell back through the burning fields, our squad dwindling with every engagement. The hybrids weren't just trying to kill us, they were harvesting us, dragging away the wounded to serve purposes I didn't want to contemplate. When we finally reached the extraction point, our entire company had been reduced to less than 30 effectives. The Navy pilot who picked us up looked at our haggard faces and asked how many more shuttles he'd need for the rest of the regiment. "This is it," I told him, my voice hoarse from screaming orders and breathing smoke. "This is all that's left." He stared at us for a long moment, then began calculating payload weights for corpses instead of living soldiers.
The extraction from Thessia Prime should have been the end of our nightmare. Instead, it was just the beginning of something infinitely worse. As our shuttle climbed through the planet's burning atmosphere toward the fleet waiting in orbit, I thought we'd escaped. I thought the Emperor had shown us mercy. I was wrong on both counts. The first sign that something was amiss came from Trooper Garrett, one of the Mordian survivors who'd been assigned to our depleted squad after Caris Prime. He was sitting 3 seats away from me, his normally pristine uniform stained with cultist blood and his own sweat, when he started laughing. Not the bitter laughter of a man who'd seen too much death, or even the hysterical giggling of someone whose mind had finally snapped under pressure. This was different. A low, musical sound that seemed to resonate in frequencies human vocal cords weren't designed to produce. When he turned to look at me, his eyes had changed. Where Garrett's brown irises should have been, I saw swirling galaxies of impossible color. "Do you hear them singing, Kalen?" he asked, his voice perfectly normal, except for the way it made my teeth ache. "The stars are singing such beautiful songs." Trooper Valen was on him before I could react, her Catachan training recognizing the signs of warp corruption faster than my Hive World education could process them. Her combat knife took him in the throat, silencing his inhuman laughter and ending what had once been a loyal servant of the Emperor.
"Warp exposure," she said grimly, wiping her blade clean on his uniform. "Must have happened during the retreat. The barrier between reality and the Imperium gets thin around major cult infestations." But it wasn't just Garrett. Over the next 6 hours, as our shuttle docked with the transport vessel Righteous Endeavor, 3 more members of our extraction group began showing signs of corruption. Private Hendricks started speaking in tongues, reciting blasphemous equations that described the curvature of space-time in ways that hurt to hear. Sergeant Kozlov's shadow began moving independently, reaching for things his physical body never touched. Corporal Salem simply vanished. Not dead, not missing, but entirely absent from reality, as if he'd never existed at all. The ship's navigator, a withered woman whose third eye was permanently sealed behind blessed metal, conducted the examinations with clinical detachment. "Minimal warp exposure," she declared after reviewing our cases. "Temporary psychic scarring. They'll recover with proper spiritual cleansing." She was lying, of course. We all knew she was lying. But the lie was necessary because the alternative was admitting that simply being near a gene-stealer cult uprising could damn your soul for eternity. That knowledge would break what little morale we had left. The cleansing process took place in the ship's chapel, a vast chamber lined with saints' bones and illuminated by the flickering light of 1,000 devotional candles. The chaplain, an elderly man whose face bore the ritual scarification of the ecclesiarchy, led us through 14 hours of purification rituals. Prayer, flagellation, the consumption of blessed oils that tasted like liquid metal and burned like acid. "The Emperor protects," he intoned, as we knelt before the golden Aquila, our backs raw from the ritual whippings. "But protection comes through suffering. Pain purifies. Agony sanctifies." I wanted to believe him. Emperor knows I tried to believe him, but as I knelt there, feeling blessed incense burn my lungs and sacred oil sear my throat, I began to understand something the recruitment officers had never mentioned. Serving the Emperor didn't protect you from evil, it just gave that evil new ways to find you. The journey to our next deployment lasted 3 weeks in the warp. 3 weeks of feeling things pressing against the ship's hull, things that whispered promises in languages older than human civilization. The Gellerfield held, mostly, but there were moments, brief, terrible moments, when reality thinned enough for us to glimpse what lay beyond. I saw Garrett during one of those moments. He was standing at the end of my bunk, still wearing his blood-stained uniform, still smiling that impossible smile. His throat wound gaped like a second mouth, but instead of blood, it leaked starlight. "The song never ends, Kalen," he said, his voice echoing from the wound instead of his mouth. "Soon you'll hear it too. Soon we'll all be singing together." When I blinked, he was gone. When I checked the casualty reports the next morning, Garrett never existed. According to official records, there had never been a Trooper Garrett in the 217th Cadian Shock Regiment. His service record, his personal effects, even the memory of him in most of the other survivors' minds, all of it had been erased by forces beyond Imperial understanding. But I remembered, and that remembering felt like a weight pressing down on my soul. Our destination was the fortress world of Mordax 7, where an Orc war was threatening to break through the outer defenses. Intelligence estimated 2 million greenskins, led by a war boss whose size and cunning had earned him the grudging respect of even veteran Imperial commanders. The 217th would be joining the 15th Mordian Iron Guard and the 3rd Talon Desert Raiders in a three-pronged assault on the primary Orc encampment. As our transports descended toward Mordax 7's scarred surface, I found myself thinking about Trooper Cassius, the young man who'd asked me what it was like to kill a Chaos Marine. He died believing he was serving something greater than himself, that his sacrifice had meaning in the Emperor's grand design. Now, watching the green-tinged clouds of the Orc-infested world rise up to meet us, I envied him. He died before learning the truth that every long-serving Guardsman eventually discovers. We weren't the Emperor's chosen warriors. We weren't humanity's last hope against the darkness. We were just meat for the grinder, and the grinder was always hungry. The Orcs were waiting for us when we landed. Of course they were. They'd probably been looking forward to it.
The thing about Orcs that the tactical briefings never quite capture is their enthusiasm. They don't fight because they have to, or because some Commissar is pointing a bolt pistol at their backs, or because ancient programming compels them toward violence. They fight because they genuinely, wholeheartedly love it. Every moment of combat fills them with the kind of pure joy that human beings might feel watching their children take their first steps. And that joy is absolutely terrifying. The first wave hit us before our boots touched the ground. Green-skinned monsters the size of Groxen came charging out of the fungal forests, bellowing war cries in their brutal language, their crude weapons spitting death with surprising accuracy. But it wasn't their size or their weapons that made my blood freeze. It was the sound of their laughter. They were having fun. Trooper Valen went down first, her Catachan reflexes no match for an Orc Knob's power claw. The massive weapon, a fusion of scrap metal and alien engineering, tore through her flak armor like it was made of parchment. She had time for one scream before the crude but effective machinery reduced her to component parts. "Fall back to the ridgeline!" Sergeant Torin shouted, but his words were lost in the cacophony of gunfire and alien roars. The new sergeant, Brennan's replacement after Caris Prime, was a veteran of the Sabbat World's crusade, a man who'd survived encounters with chaos and heretics and worse. Against Orcs, all that experience just told him how badly we were outmatched. I found cover behind a twisted piece of metal that might have once been part of an Imperial vehicle, my lasgun's power cell already down to 60% charge. The M36's targeting system was supposed to be accurate out to 200 meters, but Orcs didn't follow the same tactical doctrines as human enemies. They didn't take cover, didn't advance in formation, didn't even try to minimize casualties. They just came at us in a green tide, trusting in their natural durability and their overwhelming numbers. My first shot took an Orc boy in the chest, the las beam burning through his crude armor to sear flesh beneath. He looked down at the smoking wound, looked back at me, and started laughing even harder. Then he kept coming, bleeding freely, but apparently unbothered by what should have been a fatal injury. That's when I learned the third rule of serving in the Imperial Guard. Some enemies can't be stopped, only delayed. The battle for the landing zone lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of constant fighting against an enemy that treated mortal wounds as minor inconveniences. I watched Private Komnenos empty an entire power cell into a single Orc, every shot finding its mark, only to see the green-skinned monster reach him and tear his head off with his bare hands. The creature died seconds later, finally succumbing to its injuries, but by then it had killed 3 more guardsmen. When the retreat order finally came, not from our officers, who were mostly dead, but from the regimental Vox network, there were perhaps 50 survivors from our original landing force of 300. We fell back toward the secondary positions, carrying our wounded when we could,
abandoning them when we couldn't. And that's where I met Commissar Dracos. Where Holt had been thin and precise, a scalpel applied to the problem of military discipline, Dracos was a sledgehammer. Tall, broad-shouldered, with ritual scars covering his shaved head and a bolt pistol that looked like it had seen use in a dozen theaters of war. He stood at the fallback position's main gate, watching our ragged retreat with eyes like chips of ice. "Form ranks," he bellowed as we stumbled through the defensive perimeter. "I see cowards. I see weaklings. I see men who have forgotten their duty to the Emperor." Corporal Martinez, one of the few non-commissioned officers still breathing, tried to explain. "Sir, the orcs broke through our—" The bolt round took his head clean off, painting the defensive wall behind him with blood and brain matter. Dracos holstered his weapon with mechanical precision, his expression never changing. "I don't recall giving anyone permission to speak," he said mildly. "Let me make this clear to all of you. Retreat is temporary. In 6 hours, we will launch a counterattack to retake the landing zone. Any man who fails to advance when ordered will be shot for cowardice. Any man who turns his back on the enemy will be shot for cowardice. Any man who suggests that our position is untenable will be shot for spreading defeatist propaganda." He paused, letting his words sink in, then smiled. It was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on a human face. "The orcs may kill you, but that death will be quick and honorable. Cross me, and I promise your end will neither." And just like that, I understood why being a soldier in the 41st millennium was worse than death. It wasn't just that we faced impossible odds against inhuman enemies. It wasn't just that our equipment was inadequate and our training insufficient. It was that we served a system that considered us more dangerous than the enemies we fought. The counterattack came at dawn, just as Commissar Dracos had promised. 300 fresh troops from the reserves, supported by a handful of sentinel walkers and a single lemon rust tank. Against an estimated 5,000 orcs who'd had 6 hours to fortify their positions and bring up reinforcements. I was assigned to the second wave, tasked with exploiting any breakthrough the first wave might achieve. As I watched the initial assault force advance across the open ground toward the orc positions, I found myself hoping they would succeed, not because I believed in the mission or trusted in the Emperor's protection, but because the alternative was advancing over their corpses. The first wave lasted exactly 11 minutes. The orcs had brought up several of their crude but effective big guns during the night, massive cannons cobbled together from scrap metal but capable of reddering a lemon rust to molten slag. Our tank died in the first volley, its crew vaporized instantly. The sentinel walkers lasted another 3 minutes before orc rocket launchers turned them into twisted metal. Then it was our turn. "Fix bayonets!" Dracos ordered, his bolt pistol already in his hand. "For the Emperor!" As I attached the monomolecular blade to my lasgun's barrel, I realized something that would have terrified me just months ago. I was hoping the orcs would kill me quickly.
The charge across no man's land toward the orc positions taught me the final and most terrible truth about serving in the Imperial Guard. Death isn't just inevitable. It's a mercy you have to earn. I ran through hell with 200 other men, our battle cries lost in the thunder of orc guns. The ground beneath our feet was churned mud mixed with the remains of the first wave. Fragments of bone and metal and dreams ground into paste by alien boots. Every step forward was a step deeper into the Emperor's great machine, a mechanism that consumed human lives with the same indifference a factory might show for raw materials. To my left, Private Koresh, barely 17, recruited from the same hive-world slums that had birthed me, took a slug around through the chest. The crude orc ammunition tore through his flak armor like paper, spinning him around in a grotesque pirouette before dropping him face first into the blood-soaked earth.
He was still trying to crawl forward when I passed him, still muttering the Emperor's prayer through a mouth full of blood and broken teeth. To my right, Sergeant Torin disappeared in a cloud of red mist as an orc big shooter found its mark. One moment he was there, bellowing orders and leading from the front like every good sergeant should. The next, there was only empty space and the metallic taste of vaporized blood coating my tongue. But we kept running. Emperor help us, we kept running. Not because we were brave, though some of us were. Not because we believed victory was possible, though some still harbored that delusion. We ran because behind us, Commissar Drakos and his execution squad were following with their bolt pistols drawn, ready to put down anyone who showed the slightest hesitation. In that moment, I understood the true genius of the Imperial system. They'd made dying for the Emperor marginally preferable to living for yourself. The orc lines rose before us like a green mountain of scrap metal and alien flesh. Crude fortifications built from wrecked vehicles and the bones of previous attackers stretched across the horizon, bristling with weapons that had no right to function but somehow spat death with mechanical precision. Behind those walls, I could hear them, thousands of voices raised in their brutal war chant, eager for the slaughter to begin. Wah! 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 The sound hit us like a physical force, a wall of alien hatred and bloodthirsty joy that made my bones vibrate in their sockets. Some men broke and ran then, their courage finally shattered by the sheer impossibility of what we were being asked to do. The crack of bolt pistols behind us marked their passing. Quick, clean deaths that spared them from learning what the orcs had planned for the rest of us. I made it to within 50 meters of the orc fortifications before the ground beneath my feet exploded. The orcs had buried crude mines throughout the approach, improvised devices made from scrap metal and volatile chemicals. The blast wave picked me up and threw me backward, my ears ringing, my vision filled with dancing lights. When the world stopped spinning, I found myself lying in a crater surrounded by pieces of men I'd called friends. That's when I saw him. The orc war boss that had been terrorizing this sector for the better part of a decade. He stood atop his scrap metal fortress like a green-skinned god of war, his massive frame encased in armor that would have challenged a space marine's power suit. In his hands, a weapon that defied classification, part chainsaw, part hammer, part instrument of pure destruction. He was looking directly at me. The war boss vaulted down from his perch with impossible grace for something his size, landing in the crater beside me with enough force to crack the ground. Up close, he was even more terrifying. Scarred flesh stretched over muscles that belonged on a grox, tusks that had been sharpened to razor points, eyes that burned with an alien intelligence that was all the more frightening for being completely comprehensible. He wanted to hurt me, not because I was his enemy, not because of any strategic objective, but because causing pain brought him joy in its purest form. Little Yumi, you came all this way just to die for me? That's right nice of ya. I tried to raise my lasgun, but my right arm wasn't responding properly. Something warm was running down my side. Blood, I realized distantly. Probably internal injuries from the blast. The war boss watched my feeble attempts with what might have been amusement. Nah, don't worry about that. He kicked my weapon away with casual indifference. We is gonna have ourselves a proper scrap. Wouldn't be sportin' otherwise. That's when I understood the fourth and final rule of serving in the Imperial Guard. Even when you're dying, you're still expected to die usefully. The war boss grabbed me by the throat with one massive hand, lifting me off the ground with the same ease I might show picking up a data slate. His grip was like a vice, cutting off my air supply while he examined me with the clinical interest of a medicae studying a particularly interesting disease. "You's got some fight left in ya. That's good. Boring when they give up too quick." But I wasn't giving up. Not because I was brave, not because I believed in the Emperor's protection, but 3 years of serving in the Imperial Guard had taught me something the recruitment officers never mentioned. When everything else is taken from you, your hope, your future, your very humanity, spite becomes its own form of strength. I had one frag grenade left on my belt. While the war boss was savoring his victory, I managed to work my left hand free and pull the pin. "For the Emperor," I whispered, though by then I wasn't sure if I meant it as a battle cry or a curse. The explosion took us both. I woke up 3 days later in a field hospital, more machine than man. Cybernetic legs to replace the ones I'd lost, augmetic lungs to filter the toxins that had seared my respiratory system, neural implants to manage the brain damage from oxygen deprivation. They'd kept me alive, patched me together with sacred technology and sacred oils, ready to send me back into the grinder. Congratulations, Trooper Voss. You've been awarded the Medallion Crimson for exceptional valor in the face of the enemy. The Emperor is pleased with your service. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded and accepted the small piece of metal that was supposed to represent meaning in a universe where meaning had died screaming 10,000 years ago. They assigned me to the 88th Penal Legion after that. Punishment for surviving when so many others hadn't, though they called it strategic reassignment based on combat experience. New uniform, new regiment, new faces to watch die in new and creative ways. But the same war. Always the same war. 3 years. 3 years since they'd pulled me from the hive world's slums with promises of glory and purpose. 3 years of watching good men and women die for causes they didn't understand, fighting enemies that defied comprehension, serving a system that valued their deaths more than their lives. I understand now why they call it the grim darkness of the far future. It's not just the external threats, the Xenos, the heretics, the daemons that hunger for human souls. It's the slow, inexorable grinding away of everything that makes us human. Hope dies first, usually in basic training when you realize the scope of what you're facing. Dignity follows shortly after, beaten out of you by drill sergeants and commissars who mistake brutality for strength. Love dies on the battlefield, buried under the weight of too many friends lost to laze fire and chainswords and things that don't have names in any human language. Faith dies last, clinging desperately to life, even as evidence mounts that the Emperor's protection is just another lie told to keep the machine running. But even after all that dies, you keep going. Not because you want to, not because you believe in anything anymore, but because stopping would require an act of will that the system has carefully bred out of you. You become a perfect Imperial citizen, alive enough to fight, dead enough to not question why. The worst part isn't the physical agony, though the Imperium has perfected that into an art form. It's not even the psychological torture, the slow dissolution of self under the pressure of constant horror. The worst part is the gradual understanding that this is normal. That somewhere in the galaxy, millions of other soldiers are having the exact same realization that this system, this grinding engine of human misery, is the best humanity can manage in a universe that wants us extinct. Death would be a release from all of it, a final escape from the endless cycle of violence and suffering that defines existence in the 41st millennium. But even death isn't guaranteed to be an ending, not when the warp can claim souls for torments that make mortal agony seem like a gentle caress. So we continue, we serve, we die by inches. Our humanity sacrificed one piece at a time to keep the Imperium's great machine turning. And we tell ourselves it matters, because the alternative is admitting that we wasted our lives feeding a system that devours its own children. The Emperor protects, they say. But nobody ever asks, protects us from what? Because after 3 years of faithful service, I've learned the answer. The Emperor protects the Imperium from having to acknowledge what it's become. He protects the system from recognizing the monstrous cost of its own survival. He protects everything except the soldiers who die in his name. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And in that war, being a soldier isn't service, it's damnation with a uniform and a lasgun. Death isn't the enemy. It's the only friend you'll ever have who won't eventually betray you. The Emperor protects, just not the way you think he does.